The hydraulic arm of the excavator swung toward the weathered stone shrine with devastating precision. Marcus Santelli gripped the controls tighter, his weathered hands steady despite the chorus of protests rising from his construction crew behind him. The small roadside memorial to the Virgin Mary had stood at this intersection for over 30 years, but today it would fall to make way for the new highway expansion. "Boss, maybe we should wait," called out Tony, his youngest crew member, crossing himself nervously. "My grandmother always said shrines like this. They're protected." Marcus didn't even turn around. He'd heard enough superstitious nonsense for one morning. The steel bucket moved closer to the statue's serene face, her painted eyes gazing upward as if in silent prayer. "Protected by what?" Marcus shouted over the engine noise, his voice carrying a bitterness that had hardened over the past 2 years. Where was she when people really needed protecting? The bucket made contact with the shrine's base, sending small chunks of concrete skittering across the asphalt. Several crew members stepped back, but Marcus pressed forward, determined to finish what the county had paid him to do. Before we go deeper into this mystery, take a moment to subscribe to Virgin Mary Mysteries. Stories like this are too powerful to experience alone. Where are you watching from today? Leave a comment with the phrase "sacred protection," and let's build a prayer chain together. The destruction took less than 10 minutes. When the dust settled, only a pile of broken stone and scattered silk flowers remained where the beloved shrine had stood. Marcus shut off the excavator and climbed down, brushing concrete dust from his hands with grim satisfaction. His crew stood in unusual silence, some still clutching rosary beads that had appeared in their hands without conscious thought. "Job's done," Marcus announced, checking his watch. 11:47 a.m. "Let's move the equipment to the south section." But as he walked toward his pickup truck, something made him pause. The morning air had grown unusually still, and the traffic noise from the nearby interstate seemed muffled, as if the world itself was holding its breath. By 2:15 p.m. that same afternoon, Marcus would experience the first of several events that would challenge everything he believed about protection, faith, and the mysterious ways grace moves through a broken world. What happened in those first few hours after the shrine fell would set in motion a series of inexplicable interventions that not even Marcus's hardened heart could dismiss. But the question that would haunt him and everyone who heard this story was whether these protective signs had been waiting for his moment of destruction all along, or if his act of defiance had somehow awakened something that had been quietly watching over that intersection for decades. Marcus Santelli hadn't always been the kind of man who could tear down a sacred shrine without flinching. 2 years and 4 months ago, he would have been among the crew members crossing themselves and murmuring quiet prayers. Back then, faith had been as natural to him as breathing, morning prayers with his coffee, evening rosary with his wife Elena, and Sunday Mass at St. Catherine's with their 6-year-old daughter Sophia. Elena had discovered the roadside shrine during her pregnancy, when morning sickness forced her to pull over at that exact intersection on her way to work. She'd found the small statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe nestled among wildflowers that seemed to grow nowhere else along that stretch of highway. From that day forward, she stopped there every Tuesday morning, lighting a votive candle and whispering prayers for their unborn child's safety. "She watches over travelers," Elena used to tell Marcus, her dark eyes bright with certainty. "I can feel her presence there, especially when I'm worried about you working those dangerous sites." Marcus would smile indulgently, but something about his wife's devotion to that particular spot had always moved him. Sometimes he would find himself taking the long route home just to pass the shrine, slowing down to see if Elena's Tuesday candle was still burning. After Sophia was born, their weekly visits to the shrine became a family tradition. Their daughter would toddle among the flowers that locals had planted around the base, her chubby fingers touching the statue's painted robe with reverent curiosity. Elena would kneel on the worn stones, her lips moving in silent conversation with the Virgin, while Marcus stood guard, one eye on traffic and one on his 2 most precious treasures. The accident happened on a rainy Thursday evening in March. A drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection just half a mile from the shrine, the same intersection where Eleanor had pulled over during her pregnancy, where they'd shared countless peaceful moments as a family. The impact was instant. Elena and Sophia were gone before the ambulance arrived, leaving Marcus with nothing but hospital bills, insurance paperwork, and a fury that burned hotter than grief. In the months that followed, Marcus couldn't drive past the shrine without feeling his chest tighten with rage. Why hadn't she protected them? Why had Elena's faithful prayers and burning candles meant nothing when it mattered most? He started taking different routes, avoiding that stretch of road entirely, but the bitterness followed him everywhere. When the county highway department awarded him the expansion contract, Marcus saw the shrine's location on the demolition list and felt something dark settle in his chest. It seemed like cruel irony, or maybe it was exactly what he needed. A chance to silence the voice in his head that whispered about unanswered prayers and broken promises from heaven. He'd told his crew it was just another job, just another obstacle to remove for progress. But standing in the rubble this morning, Marcus couldn't shake the memory of Elena's gentle voice. She watches over travelers, especially when I'm worried about you. How had this sacred place, where his wife had poured out her heart in faithful devotion, become the very ground where Marcus would make his final, furious statement against the God who had failed to protect the ones he loved most? At 2:15 p.m., exactly 2 hours and 28 minutes after the shrine fell, Marcus's excavator refused to start. The engine turned over with its usual rumble, then died with a mechanical wheeze that his 23 years of construction experience told him should be impossible. The fuel tank was full, hydraulics were fine, yet the machine sat silent, as if something had simply switched it off. "Try the backup key," suggested Rodriguez, his crew chief, though they both knew it wouldn't help. Marcus tried anyway, his frustration mounting as they needed to clear debris before the county inspector arrived at 4 o'clock. Every minute meant overtime costs and potential contract penalties. What unsettled Marcus wasn't the equipment failure. Machines broke down constantly. It was how it happened. 3 attempts produced the exact same sequence, 18 seconds of normal startup, followed by a gentle dying wheeze, as if something was carefully shutting it down rather than letting it fail catastrophically. "Maybe we should use the bulldozer," Tony suggested, but the same pattern repeated. 18 seconds of operation, then peaceful shutdown, with no error codes, no warning lights, just silence where diesel engines should rumble. If this story is pulling you in, subscribe now and tell me in the comments what you believe is really happening. Your insight might reveal something we haven't seen yet. By 3:30 p.m., Marcus was sweating despite the cool air. They'd tried everything, checked fuel lines, tested batteries, called emergency service. Nothing worked. The machines would start, run just long enough to begin moving debris, then stop, as if an invisible hand was gently saying no. "Boss," Rodriguez said quietly, "my grandmother told stories about things like this. When sacred ground gets disturbed." He trailed off, but Marcus understood. His own mother had whispered similar warnings before grief burned away his willingness to believe in protective mysteries. Tony, frustrated by the delays, grabbed a shovel and began manually clearing broken stone. The moment his blade touched the statue's base fragment, a sudden gust of wind lifted dust into a small whirlwind that forced him back, coughing and rubbing his eyes. Marcus stared at the rubble pile, where something impossible was happening. Among the broken concrete, a small section of the Virgin's painted robe remained intact, the blue paint as vibrant as if touched up that morning. The paint should have been chipped, faded, damaged by 30 years of weather and morning's destruction. Instead, the colors seemed to glow with inner light that made his chest tighten with something dangerously close to recognition. Was something actively preventing the shrine's complete destruction, or was Marcus simply seeing what his broken heart desperately wanted to believe? Marcus pocketed the painted fragment and stood up, his jaw set with renewed determination. Whatever games his grief-stricken mind was playing, he had a job to finish and a crew depending on him. The county inspector would arrive in 20 minutes, and Marcus Santelli had never missed a deadline in his professional life. If the machines wouldn't cooperate, they'd finish the job by hand. "Everyone grab shovels," he ordered, his voice cutting through the afternoon stillness. "We're clearing this debris the old-fashioned way." His crew exchanged uncertain glances, but they followed orders. Marcus had always been fair with overtime pay, and none of them wanted to challenge him when his face wore that particular expression of stubborn resolve. The manual work went smoothly at first. They formed an efficient line, passing chunks of concrete and twisted metal from the demolition site to a growing pile 50 yards away. Marcus threw himself into the physical labor, welcoming the burn in his shoulders and back that helped drown out the whispered conversations behind him about wind gusts and glowing paint fragments. But as they worked deeper into the rubble, the accidents began. Rodriguez was carrying a particularly heavy piece of the shrine's foundation when his boot caught on what appeared to be level ground. Marcus watched his crew chief stumble forward, the concrete block slipping from his grasp and tumbling directly toward Tony, who was bent over sorting debris just 3 feet away. The impact should have been devastating, a 40-pound chunk of stone falling from shoulder height toward an unprotected skull. Instead, the block struck something invisible in midair and deflected sideways, landing harmlessly in the soft dirt beside Tony's knee. Both men stared at the spot where the concrete had changed direction, their faces pale with recognition of how close they'd come to tragedy. Tony's hand moved instinctively to the small silver cross hanging around his neck, his lips moving in silent prayer. "Uneven ground," Marcus said quickly, though his own eyes kept returning to the empty air where the stone had somehow changed course. "Watch your footing." But even as he spoke, Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the afternoon breeze. Eleanor used to describe moments like this, impossible near misses that she attributed to guardian angels and protective prayers. 15 minutes later, it happened again. A jagged piece of metal, loosened from the pile by their movement, began to slide toward Marcus's exposed back as he bent to examine a chunk of the statue's base. The crew members watching from across the site would later swear they saw it halt in midair for just an instant, as if caught by invisible hands, before dropping straight down instead of continuing its deadly trajectory toward Marcus's spine. This time, there was no explaining it away. The metal had been falling at an angle that physics and gravity made inevitable, yet something had clearly, undeniably changed its path. Marcus straightened slowly, his hand unconsciously reaching for the painted fragment in his pocket as memories flooded back. Eleanor kneeling at this very spot, her voice soft with certainty. "She watches over travelers, especially when I'm worried about you." Had his wife's prayers at this sacred place somehow outlasted her own life, creating an invisible shield that protected even the man who had just destroyed her most beloved sanctuary? The county inspector arrived at 4:00 p.m., clipboard in hand. Marcus met him with forced confidence, praying Dale Morrison wouldn't notice his crew's nervous energy or ask questions about the delayed demolition. "Afternoon, Marcus," Dale said, scanning the site. "I see you've made progress on the shrine removal. Any issues?" Marcus opened his mouth to explain equipment delays, but the words died as he watched what happened next. Dale stepped toward the debris pile when loose concrete shifted under his weight. The inspector stumbled backward, his clipboard flying from his hands. It should have landed in dirt or scattered papers across asphalt, but instead came to rest perfectly balanced on a small mound of earth, every page intact and unruffled by the afternoon breeze. "Well, that's lucky," Dale muttered, retrieving his papers. But Marcus had been watching closely. Luck wasn't what he'd witnessed. The clipboard had changed direction in midair, guided by the same invisible force protecting his crew all afternoon. Dale seemed oblivious, making notes about debris removal while standing exactly where Eleanor used to kneel in prayer. As the inspector continued his checks, Marcus noticed something that made his chest tighten. A small circle of wildflowers had begun blooming around the destroyed shrine's perimeter, the same delicate purple and white blooms Elena used to point out during family visits. These flowers had never grown anywhere else along the highway and shouldn't be blooming in late afternoon after heavy equipment had churned the soil. Yet there they were, tiny and perfect, their petals catching slanted sunlight like scattered prayer beads. Dale noticed them too, making notes about unexpected vegetation growth requiring additional landscaping considerations. The inspector viewed everything through bureaucratic efficiency, missing the quiet miracle at his feet. When Dale drove away, Marcus found himself alone with his crew in gathering twilight. The men stood in unusual silence, eyes drawn repeatedly to flowers that shouldn't exist and rubble that somehow felt more sacred in destruction than when the statue stood intact. Rodriguez spoke first, his voice barely a whisper. "Boss, my wife lights candles at St. Joseph's every week, prays for our safety on job sites. She always said Our Lady protects working men, especially when they're in danger." Tony pulled out his phone, photographing the mysterious flowers. "My grandmother needs to see this," he said softly. "She's been telling me stories my whole life about signs like these, but I never—" He trailed off, but Marcus understood. They were all realizing they had witnessed something that challenged the boundaries between faith and experience. But what Marcus couldn't understand, and what would keep him awake that night, was why these protective signs extended their shield to everyone except the one person who had committed the ultimate disrespect. Why was he being kept safe when he deserved punishment? And how far would this mysterious protection reach before it demanded something in return? That evening, Marcus sat alone in his pickup truck in the empty parking lot of St. Catherine's Church, staring at the painted fragment of the Virgin's robe that he'd been carrying in his pocket all afternoon. The small piece of blue fabric seemed to glow in the dashboard light, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt the overwhelming urge to pray, not the angry, demanding prayers he'd tried immediately after the accident, but the quiet, surrendering kind that Elena had taught him during their early marriage. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone and scrolled to Elena's contact information, which he'd never been able to delete. Below her number was a single voice message sent 3 days before the accident that he'd been too afraid to listen to. Marcus had glimpsed the timestamp dozens of times over the past 2 years, sent at 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, exactly the time Elena would have been at the shrine lighting her weekly candle. With trembling fingers, he pressed play. Elena's voice filled the truck cab, soft and clear, as if she were sitting beside him. "Mi amor, I'm at our special place and I wanted you to hear this. I've been praying so hard for something, and today I feel like she heard me." There was a pause, and Marcus could hear the familiar sound of highway traffic in the background. "I asked Our Lady to make me a promise that no matter what happens to me or Sophia, she'll never stop watching over you." Marcus's chest constricted as Elena's voice continued, bright with the certainty that had always been her greatest strength. "I know you think I'm silly sometimes, lighting all these candles and whispering prayers, but I made a vow here today. I promised her that even if something happens to us, I'll find a way to keep asking her to protect you. I don't know how, but I trust she'll show me the way." The message ended with Eleanor's gentle laughter and a whispered "I love you" that shattered the careful walls Marcus had built around his heart. He sat in the darkness, tears streaming down his face as he finally understood what had been happening at the worksite. Eleanor hadn't just prayed for his protection at that shrine. She had made a sacred covenant that somehow transcended death itself. For the first time since the accident, Marcus allowed himself to feel the full weight of his loss without the armor of anger to protect him. He wept for Elena's unwavering faith, for Sophia's bright laughter, for the man he used to be who knelt beside his wife during evening rosary. But underneath the grief, something else was stirring, a recognition that the protective signs he'd witnessed weren't random miracles or cruel coincidences. They were love letters from heaven, written in the language of impossible rescues and blooming flowers, signed by a wife who had found a way to keep her most sacred promise, even from beyond the grave. Marcus clutched the painted fragment to his chest and whispered his first real prayer in 2 years. "Elena, mi corazon, I'm sorry I couldn't hear you before now." But as the silence settled around him in the church parking lot, one question burned in his mind with increasing urgency. What sacred promise had his wife made at this shrine before her death? And what would it require of him to honor it? The next morning, Marcus returned to the worksite with a heavy heart and a new sense of purpose. He'd spent most of the night listening to Elena's voice message on repeat, and somewhere between midnight and dawn, he'd made a decision. The highway expansion would continue, but he would build something new where the shrine had stood, something worthy of Elena's memory and the sacred promises she'd made in this place. He was measuring the area for a small memorial garden when the emergency call came through on Rodriguez's radio. A massive sinkhole had opened on the south section of the project, and the ground was continuing to collapse. Worse, a water main had ruptured beneath the unstable earth, creating a growing cavern that threatened to undermine the entire worksite. Marcus arrived to find chaos. Water was gushing from the broken main, carving away tons of soil and creating a pit nearly 20 feet deep. His equipment operator had abandoned the excavator when the ground started giving way, leaving the expensive machine perched dangerously close to the expanding edge. Every minute of delay would cost thousands in equipment loss and project penalties. "Nobody goes near that edge," Marcus ordered, but even as he spoke, he was calculating angles and distances. The excavator could still be saved if someone skilled enough could start it and back it away from the unstable ground. Someone with enough experience to read the subtle signs that indicated whether the earth would hold for another 30 seconds. "Boss, don't even think about it," Rodriguez warned, seeing the look in Marcus's eyes. "That ground could give way any second. It's not worth your life." But Marcus was already stripping off his safety vest and hard hat. 23 years in construction had taught him to read the language of soil and stone, and he could see a narrow window of opportunity before the cavern expanded to swallow the excavator entirely. He sprinted toward the machine, his boots slipping on the wet earth as the ground trembled beneath each step. Halfway there, he felt the soil shift ominously under his left foot, and a section of ground the size of a dinner table crumbled away just inches from where he'd been standing. His heart hammered as he reached the excavator and hauled himself up into the operator's seat. The engine turned over on the first try, a small miracle in itself, given the machine's behavior the previous day. Marcus threw it into reverse and pressed the throttle, feeling the massive tracks bite into the increasingly unstable ground. But as he backed away from the sinkhole's edge, a terrible groaning sound filled the air. The weight of the excavator was causing a secondary collapse, and Marcus realized with cold clarity that he wouldn't make it to safety before the entire section gave way. In that moment of absolute terror, with death yawning beneath him and no human power capable of saving him, Marcus did something he hadn't done in 2 years. He stopped fighting, stopped calculating, stopped trying to control the outcome through sheer willpower and expertise. Instead, he closed his eyes and whispered Elena's name, followed by the words that would determine whether pride would cost him everything. "Our Lady of Guadalupe, if you're still listening to my wife's prayers, I'm ready to believe." Would this final act of surrender be enough to activate the protection that had been waiting for his acknowledgement, or had Marcus waited too long to humble his heart before the mysterious forces that had been trying to save him all along? The ground beneath the excavator held for exactly 3 heartbeats after Marcus's whispered prayer. Then, defying every law of physics he'd learned in 23 years of construction, the collapsing earth seemed to pause, slowing to a gentle settling that allowed the massive machine to reach solid ground before the final catastrophic collapse claimed where he'd been trapped moments before. Marcus climbed down on shaking legs, his crew surrounding him with pale faces. Rodriguez spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. "Marcus, that ground should have taken you and the machine both. I've never seen anything like it." But Marcus was staring back at the sinkhole, where something impossible was happening. The same purple and white wildflowers that had bloomed around the destroyed shrine were emerging along the collapse edges, their delicate petals untouched by the chaos of broken earth and rushing water. Elena's sacred garden was claiming new territory, expanding the boundaries of protection she'd promised to maintain. Within 3 weeks, Marcus had transformed the entire project. The memorial garden at the original shrine location became the centerpiece of a new roadside sanctuary, complete with a stone statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe that seemed to glow during evening hours. Local families began visiting regularly, leaving flowers and lighting candles, just as Elena had done. The construction crew became the garden's unofficial guardians. Rodriguez planted roses that bloomed year-round, defying local growing seasons. Tony installed a small fountain where the sinkhole had been, its flowing water audible from the highway, drawing travelers who needed peaceful moments during their journeys. Marcus spent most evenings at the roadside sanctuary, kneeling where his wife had once knelt, whispering prayers of gratitude and requests for continued guidance. Sometimes other visitors joined him, elderly women clutching rosary beads, young fathers worried about family safety, travelers who had stopped on impulse and found themselves unable to leave without saying a prayer. If this story moved you, subscribe to Virgin Mary Mysteries so you never miss the next chapter in these extraordinary mysteries. And if you've experienced your own moment of protective grace, share it in the comments with the phrase, Elena's Promise, so we can build a prayer chain that honors all the guardian angels watching over us. The highway project was completed on schedule, but the story continued. Travelers began reporting their own experiences, near-miss accidents that became impossible rescues, family reconciliations that began with spontaneous stops for prayer, medical diagnoses that changed for the better after candlelit vigils at Elena's garden. Marcus knew his wife's promise had grown beyond protecting just him. The love she had poured into this sacred place was now sheltering anyone who needed divine intervention during their journey. But the mystery that continued to draw him back each evening wasn't just about protection. It was about the growing certainty that Elena's presence was becoming stronger, not fading, as if her promise was opening doorways between heaven and earth that had always existed but never been recognized. What other miracles might unfold for those who believe that love transcends death, and that some promises are too sacred to be broken by anything as temporary as leaving this world?